Robert continued. I left everything to my granddaughter, and the trustee until she turns 25 is a veterans charity, not her parents. You committed crimes, committed fraud, abandoned me, all to steal something that was never yours, whether I lived or died. The cold November rain of the Midwest poured down onto the slate-tiled roof of an old Victorian mansion standing on Dover Center Road. The house loomed like a forgotten fortress stranded among the newly built modern mansions surrounding it. On Zillow, the property was preliminarily valued at around $850,000 thanks to its prime location and a lot spanning nearly 1 acre, approximately 4,000 square meters, but in reality, the white paint on the exterior had begun to peel and weeds were already creeping over the gravel driveway. Inside the dim living room, the musty scent of aged oak wood blended with the sharp, unmistakable smell of CLP gun oil. Robert Miller, 75, sat motionless in a worn, cracked leather rocking chair. He was a former U.S. Marine who had served in Vietnam. On the opposite wall, a glass shadow box hung with solemn reverence, containing a neatly folded triangular American flag and a Purple Heart medal. Robert raised a trembling hand to lift a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. The stroke 6 months earlier had taken away the mobility of the left side of his body, and early-stage dementia was beginning to gnaw at his mind like a creeping fog. "Sarah! Michael," Robert murmured, his cloudy eyes fixed on the window, waiting for a rare weekend visit. He belonged to the old generation, principled, frugal, hateful of debt, and a firm believer in honor. To him, owing money was a humiliation. Meanwhile, inside a brand-new BMW X5, whose lease payments were already 2 months overdue, screeching to a stop in front of the house, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael, 35, Robert's only son, slumped forward with his head pressed against the steering wheel. His phone screen lit up with a glaring red alert from the Chase banking app. Alert: available credit, $0. Credit card balance, negative $203,450. Immediate minimum payment required. Michael was the textbook failure of a distorted American dream, chasing quick wealth through day trading only to suffer catastrophic losses. In the passenger seat, Sarah, Michael's wife, was frantically scrolling through Instagram. She stared at a photo of the neighbor's family vacationing in Aspen, captioned, "Upper class life, #blessed." Sarah turned toward her husband, her gaze sharp as a razor. "Michael, did you check the mailbox this morning? More letters from the bank. The foreclosure notice will arrive within 30 days if you don't come up with the money. We'll be out on the street, and little Lily will have to attend public school with poor kids. I will not accept that." Michael looked up, sweat pouring down his forehead despite the 45-degree Fahrenheit cold. "I'm trying, Sarah. The market will recover." "Trying my ass," Sarah hissed, stabbing her finger toward the towering Victorian house ahead. "Look at it. Your father is sitting on a pile of gold. This house, this land, if we sell it and subdivide, we can make over $1 million. He's old. He's senile. What does he need to live alone in a haunted 3,000-square-foot mansion for?" Sarah leaned close to Michael's ear, her voice cold as a verdict. "This is the last time I'm saying it. Either you get money from your father's assets to save this family, or we get divorced. I'll take Lily with me. You choose." Both of them stepped out of the car, slipping on fake cheerful smiles. Michael walked into the house, the damp stench hitting his nose. He looked at his father, a man once strong as steel, now trembling as he dropped his coffee spoon on the floor. Robert looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Who? Sergeant, is that you?" In that moment, the last shred of conscience inside Michael flickered out. He no longer saw his father. He saw only an old obstacle standing between him and $850,000, the money that could save his miserable life. Michael knelt down, picked up the spoon, and grasped Robert's thin, fragile hand. But inside his mind, a cruel plan had already begun to take shape. "Not the sergeant, Dad. It's me, Michael. I came to help you." Outside the window, Sarah stood with her arms crossed, staring at the aging house like a predator studying a piece of fresh meat. Evil's opportunity came sooner than expected. 1 week after the argument, Robert suffered an ischemic stroke right in the kitchen. He collapsed, shattering an old ceramic vase, his mouth twisting, his voice reduced to incomprehensible sounds. Michael was there. Instead of panicking and calling 911 immediately, he stood frozen for 10 seconds that decided a human fate. His first action was not checking a pulse. It was reaching into his father's jacket pocket and pulling out the worn leather wallet containing the veteran's driver's license and lifetime Medicare insurance card. Michael drove Robert straight to the emergency room of a downtown inner-city general hospital instead of the upscale private hospital near their home. On a Friday night, the ER was a war zone, ambulance sirens wailing nonstop, overdose patients screaming, and doctors and nurses racing against severe traffic accident cases. Robert was pushed into triage. Michael told the intake staff that his father's name was John, that he had no identification, no insurance, and had been found unconscious on the roadside. In the chaos, Robert, now unable to speak, half paralyzed, was labeled John Doe and shoved into a forgotten corner to wait for a public physician, classified under indigent care. At that moment, from the bed next to him, a heart monitor emitted a long, chilling flat line. A homeless man around Robert's age had just died of heart failure after years of alcoholism. The on-duty nurse, drenched in sweat, shouted, "We lost the patient in bed 4. Does anyone know who he is?" Michael looked at the dead man, gray-bearded, hollow-faced, bearing an uncanny resemblance to his father. A mad yet perfect idea flashed into his mind. He rushed forward, collapsing over the stranger's body, wailing hysterically, "Dad! Oh, God, my father! That's Robert Miller!" Michael's performance was flawless. Amid the understaffed chaos of the night shift, the attending physician quickly signed the death certificate for Robert Miller, based solely on identification by the sole next of kin. No one checked fingerprints. The death appeared natural, attributed to age and cardiac disease. While Michael signed paperwork to expedite the cremation of his father, the real Robert, now an unclaimed John Doe, was processed by a social worker and transferred overnight to a run-down nursing home near the Indiana state border, over 100 miles, a place that specialized in forgotten, impoverished patients. The ambulance doors closed, severing Robert from his life, permanently erasing the name Robert Miller from the world of the living. 2 days after the fateful ER night, a brief but formal obituary appeared in the local newspaper, The Plain Dealer. Robert Miller, 75, U.S. Marine veteran, passed away peacefully due to stroke complications. Private services held per the deceased's wishes. Those black and white lines officially ended Robert's legal existence. Michael arranged a swift funeral at Jenkins' funeral home, paying an extra $500 for expedited service. In the cold, lily-scented hall, a cheap mahogany coffin lay alone, its lid tightly sealed. When several neighbors asked to see Robert one last time, Michael wiped his eyes, his voice trembling yet firm. "The fall during the stroke disfigured my father's face. He was always a proud man. He wanted people to remember him as he was when he was strong. Please respect his wishes." The flawless excuse silenced all doubts. No one dared demand the coffin be opened to verify whether it held a homeless stranger's body or simply weighted sandbags. After the funeral service, the Westlake neighbors, following Midwest custom, filed into the Miller home for the wake. They brought steaming trays of casseroles, potato salad, and desserts. Mrs. Higgins, the nosiest neighbor on the block, clasped Michael's hands. "Your father was a good man. God will watch over him." Michael nodded, accepting a tray of tuna casserole, crocodile tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. We'll miss him terribly." Meanwhile, Sarah played the role of the devoted wife, graciously pouring tea for the guests. But behind her mournful expression, her eyes covertly scanned the living room. She wasn't seeing grief. She was calculating whether the wall separating the dining area was load-bearing and how much it would cost to knock it down for an open-concept remodel. When the last guest left and the door closed, the sorrowful smile vanished from Michael's face instantly. He exhaled in relief and tossed his black tie onto the sofa. "It's done," Michael said flatly. "The crematorium will handle the body tomorrow. The certified copies of the death certificate will arrive Monday. You can call the contractor now." The couple looked at each other without a trace of remorse. In their eyes, Robert Miller had completely evaporated from this world, leaving behind the key to a treasure chest. They had no idea that 100 miles away, in a filthy facility reeking of disinfectant, a John Doe had just snapped his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, his right hand clenched, struggling to move each finger one by one. On Tuesday morning, Michael walked out of the Cuyahoga County Recorder's office holding a freshly printed deed transfer, the ink still smelling new. He had used a forged death certificate and his status as the sole legal heir, deliberately concealing any search for a will or possible trust funds, to transfer ownership of the $850,000 house into his own name. The administrative process went through with frightening smoothness. The bureaucratic system cared only about stamps and signatures, not about the truth. With ownership secured, Michael chose not to sell the house immediately to avoid drawing attention. Instead, he made a bolder financial move, signing a cash-out refinance mortgage with a private bank hungry for sales. Given Westlake's inflated property valuations, the bank swiftly approved a $600,000 loan deposited directly into Michael's account within 48 hours. The moment the balance alert hit his phone, Michael felt reborn. He immediately wired payments to wipe out over $200,000 in black card credit debt and high-interest loans. The sensation of an unbearable weight being lifted intoxicated him with victory. That afternoon, a pearl-white Tesla Model X Plaid, priced at over $100,000, glided silently into the gravel driveway of the old house. The falcon wing doors opened, and Michael stepped out wearing Ray-Ban sunglasses, looking at Sarah as she waited with a satisfied smile. "Well," Michael patted the hood of the car, "a reward for those who know how to seize opportunity." Sarah barely cared about the car. Her eyes were locked onto the massive, bright yellow construction dumpster that a truck had just dropped squarely on the front lawn. "Wonderful, darling," Sarah said, holding blueprints in her hand. "But now it's time to clean up this trash. I've already called the demolition crew. They'll be here tomorrow morning. I want that disgusting kitchen gone and your father's moldy reading room, too. We need open space." Michael looked at the house where he had grown up. For a split second, the image of his elderly father sitting by the window reading a newspaper flashed through his mind. Then the soft ding of a bank balance notification echoed from his pocket. Michael smirked and nodded. "Destroy it all. We need a fresh start." They stood there, glowing beside the expensive electric car, while the shadow of the Victorian house stretched long behind them like a wounded giant, preparing to endure the first blows of the hammer wielded by the very child it had raised. The roar of a small bobcat excavator tore through the quiet morning of the Westlake neighborhood. Sarah stood on the porch, holding a Starbucks latte, wearing sunglasses, barking orders at the operator like a general on the battlefield. Her target was the hybrid tea rose garden behind the house, Robert's pride and the place where he had spent thousands of hours tending the soil since his wife's death. The old rose bushes, once bursting into brilliant bloom every summer, were now coldly scooped up by the excavator's bucket, roots torn apart, dirt flung everywhere. "Level it all!" Sarah screamed over the engine noise. "I want the infinity pool right there. Don't leave a single root. I don't want grass growing back and ruining the view." In less than an hour, the garden Robert had devoted his life to became a bald patch of brown earth, scarred by deep tread marks. Inside the house, the purge was even brutal. Michael and a cleanup crew hauled box after box into the massive dumpster outside. Heavy Amish-made oak furniture was tossed without mercy, shattering as it slammed into the metal walls. The peak of desecration came in the living room. Sarah stepped up to the wall of memorabilia and removed the shadow box containing the folded American flag and the Purple Heart medal. "These things collect too much dust." Sarah wrinkled her nose and handed it to Michael. "Throw it away. Who displays violent junk like this in a minimalist living room these days? It ruins the feng shui." Michael took the box. He stared at the medal, proof that his father had shed blood for his country. A flicker of conscience stirred inside him, making his hands hesitate. "Sarah, maybe we should store it somewhere. I mean, it's still—" "Store it where?" Sarah cut him off, her voice ice cold. "The storage room you knocked down to expand the garage for the Tesla? Throw it away, Michael. Don't let the past drag us down." Michael swallowed, turned his face away to escape the guilt, and hurled the box into the dumpster. The sound of shattering glass rang out, burying the national flag beneath broken drywall and rotting wood. Mrs. Higgins stood behind her fence, witnessing the scene. She raised her hand to her mouth and whispered, "My God, they're throwing away his soul." But Michael and Sarah didn't care. To them, it was just construction waste that needed to be cleared to make room for an era of borrowed glamour. At Sunset Pines Nursing Home on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana, a dilapidated facility catering to the lowest-paying social insurance cases, the stench of bleach failed to mask the smell of urine and damp, peeling walls. Ceiling fans creaked rhythmically, like a countdown for the people waiting to die inside. In cramped room 304, with 4 hospital beds, the man identified as John Doe began to stir. Robert opened his eyes. The flickering fluorescent lights stabbed at his vision. His head rang as if artillery had exploded beside his ear. His throat was dry as a desert. He tried to call his son's name, but paralyzed facial muscles produced only meaningless groans. He looked around. This was not a hospital. Elderly bodies lay motionless around him, tangled in tubes and wires. A heavy-set nurse with a bored expression walked past, glanced at him, scribbled something on the clipboard at the foot of his bed, and muttered, "Still not gone yet, tough old bastard." Robert looked down at his wrist. A white plastic band bore cold black letters, "Patient John Doe, ID 89402. No name, Robert Miller. No date of birth, no sign of a man with an identity. A lightning bolt of memory tore through the fog in his mind. The stroke in the kitchen, Michael standing there, the chaos of the hospital, and then darkness. Why wasn't Michael here? Why was he now a nobody? He tried to lift his right arm. It felt heavy, but it obeyed. He touched the thin hospital gown over his chest where his heart was pounding in terror. Slowly, the pieces of the truth came together. His son hadn't called for help immediately. He hadn't given the doctors his papers. He had discarded him. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than any bullet wound Robert had suffered at Quezon. A hot tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek, but it was instantly halted by another force rising from deep within, the instinct of a U.S. Marine. Semper Fi. I will not die here. Robert clenched his dentures, his gaze sharpening from cloudy to cold. He began moving the fingers of his left hand, inch by inch, training through pain. If his son wanted him dead to steal what he'd built with blood, then he had made the greatest mistake of his life. He had forgotten that his father had never surrendered. Robert closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to focus. The battle to reclaim his life and his honor had just begun. Maria Rodriguez, a veteran social worker at Sunset Pines, sat in front of an aging computer, rubbing her temples. Her job was to locate next of kin for homeless patients in order to file for Medicaid or state assistance. With the case of John Doe in room 304, she had hit a dead end for 2 straight weeks. Unwilling to believe that an elderly man with such military discipline could truly be abandoned, Maria resorted to a last measure. She borrowed a portable fingerprint scanner from a friend in the local police department to cross-check national databases. The computer beeped sharply. The result on the screen nearly made her drop her coffee. Fingerprint match, 99.9%, Veterans Affairs Database. Name, Robert Edward Miller. Rank, U.S. Marine Sergeant retired. But the red text below made her blood run cold. Status, deceased. Date, 11/12/2025. What the hell is this? Maria blurted out. Dead people don't breathe in room 304. Years of experience told her immediately that this was a case of elder abuse, insurance fraud, or asset theft. She printed the documents, clipped them tightly into a file, and rushed toward the patient's room. Robert sat propped against his pillow, eyes fixed on the window. When he saw Maria enter with a grave expression, he turned, studying her. Maria pulled up a chair beside the bed and lowered her voice to a whisper. You're Robert Miller, aren't you? A U.S. Marine veteran. Robert's facial muscles twitched. He nodded slowly. Maria opened the file. Mr. Miller, the system says you died 3 weeks ago. Your son, Michael Miller, signed the paperwork. He abandoned you here and declared you dead to steal your assets. I have to report this to the police and Adult Protective Services immediately. He will go to prison. She stood to grab her phone. A thin, trembling hand, hard as cold steel, clamped around her wrist. Robert shook his head violently, his breathing raspy and uneven. Struggling to control his recovering voice, he forced out broken, hoarse words. No, no police, not yet. Maria froze. What are you saying? He killed you on paper. Robert tightened his grip, his eyes burning with hatred and calculation. I need to go home. I want to see it myself. Don't report it. Help me. Hunt. Maria stared into the old soldier's eyes. She didn't see fear. She saw the resolve of a warrior preparing for his final battle. Slowly, she lowered her phone and nodded. All right, Sergeant. We'll do it your way. Maria helped Robert rent a room at a cheap Super 8 motel along Interstate 90, only a few miles from wealthy Westlake, but worlds apart. By day, Robert attacked physical therapy with obsessive determination, forcing atrophied muscles back into motion. By night, the hunt began. In Maria's battered Ford Taurus, they parked silently beneath an old oak tree at the corner of the street, about 100 yards away from his former home. The car window was cracked open so Robert's cigarette smoke could drift into the freezing Ohio mist. Through military-grade binoculars, the only thing Maria could find at a second-hand shop, Robert watched his former home. The once warm Victorian now resembled a sterile furniture showroom. The small wooden windows had been ripped out, replaced with floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, exposing a chandelier-lit interior. Robert saw Michael leaning against the Tesla charging in the driveway, holding an expensive glass of red wine, laughing loudly into his phone like a jackpot winner. Inside the living room, Sarah was directing workers installing a fake electronic fireplace, replacing the hand-laid brick hearth Robert's grandfather had built 80 years earlier. "They're erasing every trace of you," Maria whispered painfully. Robert didn't respond at first. He adjusted the binoculars and focused on the pile of construction debris still sitting in the yard. There he saw a corner of the American flag, the same flag that had once covered his comrade's coffin, now limp, smeared with mud and plaster. In that moment, the last remnants of paternal affection inside Robert shattered. He lowered the binoculars. His hand no longer trembled. It clenched into a fist. His eyes became calm, sharp, and cold, like a frozen winter lake. "You know, Maria," Robert said slowly, each word clear, "in the military, they taught me this. When the enemy occupies your position, don't attack head-on without ammunition. Observe their habits, wait for the opening, and when the time comes, wipe them out without mercy." He turned to Maria, his face carved with lines of resolve. "He's not my son anymore. He's a target, and I have everything I need now." The next morning, Maria's old Ford pulled up in front of the law office of James Thompson in downtown Cleveland. Thompson, an old friend and Robert's personal attorney for over 30 years, dropped his Mont-Blanc fountain pen onto the desk the moment he saw the dead man walk into his office. "My God, Robert, I just received your death certificate last week," Thompson exclaimed, his face draining of all color. Robert sat down, his expression unnaturally calm. "That paper is fake, James, just like my signature on this pile of property transfer documents." The private meeting unfolded in a tense atmosphere. Thompson reviewed the public records on the real estate database system. He discovered that Michael had not only declared Robert dead, but had also forged Robert's signature on a backdated power of attorney dated to before Robert's stroke in order to legitimize the $600,000 mortgage loan from the bank. "This is first-degree fraud," Thompson adjusted his glasses, his voice hardening. "We can kick him out of the house and send him to prison this afternoon." "No." Robert raised a hand to stop him. "If we arrest him now, the bank will immediately claw the money back. He'll only face a light charge for no serious consequences yet. I want him to spend that money. I want him buried in debt with no way out." To strengthen the evidence of his son's cruelty, Maria brought out the old iPad. He logged into the iCloud account linked to the Ring doorbell security system and the indoor cameras he had installed last year. Michael, in his arrogance and technological ignorance, had changed the Wi-Fi password but forgot or never knew that the video footage stored on the cloud was still controlled by Robert's original email account. On the screen, video clips appeared one by one, crystal clear, with sharp audio. November 15th, Michael laughed with Sarah while signing the loan papers. "The old man is probably rotting in some hole by now. Who cares?" November 20th, Sarah threw Robert's military commendations into the trash and said, "Finally got rid of that old man smell." Thompson watched the footage, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned white. He looked at Robert, the veteran sitting motionless like a stone statue. "Robert, how do you want to handle this?" Robert turned off the iPad screen, his gaze icy. "Prepare the subpoenas, but keep everything sealed until July 4th. I want to give him an Independence Day gift he will never forget." The plan was set. The legal trap had been laid, waiting for the prey to walk in and enjoy his final feast. Independence Day, July 4th, in Westlake, was bathed in golden sunlight, the sky a flawless blue without a single cloud. At the Miller residence, a festive atmosphere filled the air, but it no longer carried the old warmth and simplicity. Instead, it was suffocatingly extravagant. Michael and Sarah had transformed the backyard into a miniature resort. The infinity pool, paved with shimmering blue marble, sparkled under the sun, completely replacing the old rose garden. The rich aroma of A5 Wagyu beef and Maine lobster rose from a $5,000 Weber Summit grill where a hired private chef expertly flipped the meat. Today's guests were the newly risen elite of Oak Creek, well-groomed real estate brokers, local bank executives, and housewives from the HOA. They held chilled glasses of Sauvignon Blanc, strolling across the lush artificial grass, marveling at the house's transformation. Sarah, radiant in a Zimmermann designer dress, moved like a queen, constantly taking check-in photos to post on her Instagram story with the caption, "Freedom and luxury, #American Dream." She soaked in the hollow praise, convinced she had truly entered high society. As the sun began to set, painting the sky red, Michael stepped onto the teakwood platform beside the pool. He tapped a silver spoon lightly against a crystal wine glass to draw attention. The noise faded. Michael smiled, his face flushed from alcohol and exhilaration. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for celebrating Independence Day with us. This year, July 4th, is especially meaningful to me. It marks the freedom of the Miller family." He paused, sweeping his hand across the house and garden. "Many people say I was lucky to inherit this property, but they're wrong. My father, God rest his soul, was a good man, but old-fashioned. He let this house rot in the past. I had the vision to turn it into gold. This isn't just a house, it's a symbol of rebirth, of business foresight." Thunderous applause erupted. Guests raised their glasses. "Congratulations, Michael, a true investment genius." Michael tilted his head back and drained his glass, feeling like the king of the world. He had no idea that beyond the 2-meter-high iron gate, an old Ford Taurus had just shut off its engine. Fireworks began exploding in the distance, but a far more explosive display was about to erupt in this very backyard. Just as the first low fireworks burst lit up the sky over Westlake, illuminating the laughing faces of the crowd, another sound rang out, the cold metallic click of the rear garden gate latch. The heavy gate swung open, not from the wind, but from a steady hand pushing it wide. From the darkness of the oak trees, a figure stepped into the pool lights. Not the senile old man in a hospital gown that Michael had discarded. Standing before the crowd was a soldier. Robert Miller stood there, his back straight as a pine tree. He wore the dark blue Marine Corps dress blues, red stripes running down the trousers, gold buttons gleaming, and a row of metal ribbons on his left chest reflecting the lights. He needed no cane. Rage had become the spine that held him upright. The soft jazz music died instantly. Laughter vanished as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire party. Dozens of eyes locked onto the uninvited guest. Michael was lifting his glass to his mouth when his hand froze midair. He blinked repeatedly, thinking the alcohol was playing tricks on his mind. He saw his father, yet not his father. It was a commanding specter stepping out of hell. The crystal glass slipped from Michael's sweat-soaked fingers and hit the marble floor. Crash! The shattering sound ripped through the deadly silence. Red wine spread like blood across the white stone. Sarah, standing near the grill, let out a piercing scream, clamping her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide in horror, as if seeing a demon. "A ghost! It's a ghost! Michael, he's back to take our lives!" The guests began whispering in panic, retreating and forming a wide path. Robert walked slowly, his military boots striking the stone with heavy thuds, each step like a countdown of death. He moved through the crowd, straight toward the platform where his son stood trembling. Michael staggered backward, nearly falling into the pool. He stammered, his face drained of all color, teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Dad, that's impossible. The hospital called. I signed the papers. You were dead." Robert stopped 2 steps away. He stared into his son's cowardly eyes. There was no love left, only the contempt of a soldier looking at a deserter. His voice rang out, deep and steel-hard, overpowering the distant roar of fireworks. "I'm not a ghost, Michael, and I'm not your father anymore. I'm your creditor." 3 weeks after the fateful night of July 4th, the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas was packed to capacity. The case Miller versus Miller had become the center of local media attention, splashed across headlines. Veteran returns from the dead to sue his son for fraud. Michael and Sarah sat at the defendant's table, their faces sunken, stripped of every trace of former arrogance. Across from them, Robert Miller sat upright beside attorney James Thompson, his immaculate military uniform radiating quiet authority. Michael's lawyer opened with a weak defense, clinging desperately to the excuse of administrative confusion. "My client, in a state of extreme grief, believed his father had passed away and rushed to manage the estate for preservation purposes. The renovations were done out of filial respect to honor his father's memory." Thompson stood. He said nothing. He simply handed the judge a USB drive. "Your Honor," Thompson said calmly, "the filial respect referenced by the defense is best illustrated by Exhibit 14. The courtroom screen flickered to life. Security footage from the living room appeared, Michael and Sarah drinking wine immediately after finalizing the fake death certificate. Michael's voice echoed clearly through the silent courtroom, dripping with mockery. "Good thing the old man checked out fast. If he ever crawls back here, I'll dump him straight into a psych ward. No way I'm letting him block my access to that money." Sarah's voice followed, sharp and cold. "Don't forget to burn those useless military medals." A wave of outrage swept the room. Jurors stared at Michael as if he were a monster. The judge slammed the gavel, eyes filled with unmistakable contempt. The defense's story of devotion collapsed instantly. When proceedings moved to asset determination, the judge delivered his ruling in an icy tone. "The transfer of property ownership based on a fraudulent death certificate is void ab initio. Full ownership of the residence is immediately restored to Robert Miller." Michael exhaled in relief, thinking losing the house was the end of it. Then the judge continued. "As for the $600,000 mortgage loan obtained by the defendant, because the legal owner's signature was forged, the property cannot be held as collateral." Michael's eyes lit up with hope. The gavel struck. Therefore, the loan is reclassified as personal unsecured debt belonging solely to Michael Miller, arising from bank fraud. The bank is authorized to seize all present assets and garnish future income until the debt is fully repaid. Michael's face drained of all color. He hadn't just lost the house, he was buried under crushing debt with no assets left to sell and now faced prison. As Michael collapsed inward, Robert requested permission to speak. He leaned on the table and looked straight at his trembling son. Michael, you sold your soul to steal that house, but there's one thing you never knew. Robert nodded to Thompson, who opened a yellowed, time-worn folder. You thought I didn't plan ahead? Robert said calmly. 10 years ago, I created an irrevocable trust. He raised the document for the entire courtroom to see. Under the terms of that trust, even if I had truly died, this house would never belong to you. The sole beneficiary is Lily, your daughter. The courtroom fell dead silent. Michael looked up, eyes wide in horror. Robert continued, each word slicing deeper. I left everything to my granddaughter, and the trustee until she turns 25 is a veterans charity, not her parents. You committed crimes, committed fraud, abandoned me, all to steal something that was never yours, whether I lived or died. It was the killing blow. Every scheme, every sin, every betrayal had been meaningless. Michael had destroyed his own life for a treasure he never had the key to. He collapsed onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably. No one pitied him. This punishment was far worse than prison. It was the sentence of ignorance and blind greed. The judge's gavel struck the oak bench one final time, closing the trial and opening two vastly different destinies. Court bailiffs approached the defense table. Michael offered no resistance as the handcuffs closed around his wrists, his eyes hollow, fixed on nothing. He had lost everything: his family, his dignity, his freedom, and his hollow dream of wealth. Beside him, Sarah screamed hysterically, mascara streaking down her face. She turned on Michael, shrieking, "This is all your fault! I told you to stop!" Her voice echoed down the courthouse hallway before the doors slammed shut, carrying greed and chaos out of Robert's life forever. Robert stood, straightening his dress uniform. He neither smiled nor celebrated. On the old soldier's face was only the quiet peace of a man who had completed the hardest mission of his life. Maria helped him down the courthouse steps, bathed in the golden Ohio afternoon light. At the bottom, a child protective services worker held the hand of Lily. The 8-year-old broke free and ran up the steps, throwing herself into her grandfather's arms. "Grandpa, Mommy and Daddy said you were gone forever," she cried. Robert knelt, holding her close, the only untainted legacy of the Miller family. "I was just away on a long mission," he said softly. "I'm home now." 2 months later, a moving truck stood outside the Westlake mansion. The "for sale" sign was gone, replaced by "sold." Robert stood on the porch, looking at what his son had created, a stunning modern house, beautiful, yet cold and soulless. He sold it immediately after reclaiming ownership. Its value had skyrocketed due to Michael's reckless renovations, a bitter irony. Attorney Thompson handed Robert the final paperwork. "You're certain, Robert, this house has been in your family for 3 generations." Robert shook his head. "No, James. This house died the day Michael declared me dead. What remains is just brick, mortar, and greed. I'm selling it to free the past." The over $1 million from the sale was divided. A small portion purchased a modest lakeside cottage on Lake Erie. The rest went directly into Lily's education trust and a legal aid fund for elderly victims of asset abuse, where Maria was soon appointed executive director. Wind swept across Lake Erie, waves whispering against the stones. Robert sat in an old rocking chair, the only item he kept, rescued by Maria from the trash. Beside him, Maria and Lily, now under her guardianship, flew a kite. He watched it dance freely in the sky, then lowered his eyes to write the final lines in a journal meant for Lily one day. Dear Lily. Robert closed the notebook. He closed his eyes, breathing in the salty lake air, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. No debts, no lies, no burdens. At last, the old soldier was truly home.